I would like to invite Professor Takashi Shiraishi, Senior Fellow of GRIPS Alliance, to make welcoming remarks. Professor Shiraishi, please.
Thank you, Michishita-san. On behalf of GRIPS Alliance, which is the think tank part attached to GRIPS, I'm pleased to announce that we have Ambassador Arif Havas Oegroseno, Indonesian Ambassador to Germany and a most senior and prominent diplomat of Indonesia, and Professor Nobukatsu Kanehara, who served as Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary to Prime Minister Abe from 2012 to 2019, and is one of the most important architects of Prime Minister Abe's external strategy. As you all know, Japanese government under Prime Minister Suga recently hosted a four-party talk of foreign ministers of Japan, the United States, Australia, and India, and we reaffirmed our joint commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific. Shortly after the meeting, Prime Minister Suga himself visited Vietnam and Indonesia in his first visit after he became Prime Minister to see his partners and to underline the strategic importance Japan attaches to Vietnam and Indonesia, and all the leaders of Japan, Indonesia, and Vietnam reaffirmed again their commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific. We did not time this webinar knowingly right after Prime Minister Suga's return from Indonesia, but nonetheless, it is timely to have two top experts of foreign policy and free and open Indo-Pacific strategy for our webinar today. I'm very sure we'll learn a lot from Ambassador Arif Oegroseno and Professor Kanehara. I'm looking forward to their lectures as well as the lively discussion thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shiraishi, for your remarks. The issue of maritime order in the South China Sea has become a major geopolitical issue in East Asia and Southeast Asia as the US-China confrontation deepens, and has been discussed at international forums such as ASEAN and the East Asia Summit. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 this year, there have been attempts to change the current state of the maritime order by force in the South China Sea, and it is necessary for us to aim for securing an international order based on rules, freedom of navigation, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Today, we have invited two experts from Indonesia and Japan to consider that issue. First of all, let me invite Ambassador Arif Havas Oegroseno, Indonesian Ambassador to Germany. Ambassador Oegroseno served as the former Vice Minister for Maritime Sovereignty at the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs, and he has deep knowledge on the South China Sea issues and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In 2010, he became the first Indonesian to preside over the conference on the Convention on Maritime Law of 1982 at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Ambassador Oegroseno will speak for about 45 minutes. Ambassador Oegroseno, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Michishita-san, and thank you very much, Professor Shiraishi, for giving us the kind words in your opening remarks, and also Professor Kanehara. I think we have met once in Tokyo, I think in 2017 or 18, when I accompanied my minister to have a courtesy visit to Prime Minister at that time. Dear colleague, I think many of you, of course, have discussed or have read or have been involved in many talks and seminars on the South China Sea. And today, this afternoon, I would like to give a little bit of much more basic issue of South China Sea, which is the dispute itself, because sometimes people are looking at the geopolitical aspect more, people looking at the flashpoint, people are looking at the news media more than the basic core of the issue itself. I believe by understanding the basic core of the issue, we can then think through what are the best steps to move forward to create our region, Southeast Asia and East Asia, a region that is peaceful, the region that can coexist each other. I have, I'm going to share with you a presentation. Hang on. Is it on now? Can you see it? Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple of issues I want to discuss. I think, hi? Full screen. Hang on a second. Yeah. So a couple of issues I want to discuss this afternoon is about the topic itself, the geography aspect, the object of dispute, the projections of the maritime zone of each of the object of dispute, and when people talk about resolving sovereignty dispute, is that really what we are looking at, resolving dispute? And also we want to talk about the dispute in the context of geopolitics today, and maybe a little bit about Indonesian positions and conclusions after that. I think it's important for us to have a clarity on the issue of South China Sea, because it is one of the flashpoints in the region. I think for policymakers, they need to go a little bit deeper and understand the nature of the issue, so that they can make an informed decisions on their policies. And also for academics, for students, I hope we can inspire more students to write about South China Sea issue. This is the geography of South China Sea. This is a map that is a courtesy of the Center of International Law in National University of Singapore. This is the general locations of South China Sea. And I want to go a little bit deeper, zoom. These are the map that I took from the PCA tribunal. You have the upper part and the lower part of the South China Sea. If you look at that in a much more deeper manner, that's the zoom of the area. And you have different countries around the water, so it's much clearer now. And this is a very interesting publication by the International Hydrographic Organizations of 1953. And in this publications about limits of oceans and seas, they define the location of South China Sea. So this is from the 1953 documents, you can see there, South China Sea is quite big actually. It goes all the way bordering to Java Sea. So you see all these Indonesian islands, Natuna there, they're still in the water of South China Sea. So that's why sometimes when people talk about South China Sea, they don't really know exactly where it starts and where it ends. And if they look at this map, they're looking at such a big waters that is named South China Sea. This is the 2002 documents of International Hydrographic Organizations. The difference is that if you look at the map on the right, there is a carve out of South China Sea, document 6.4, and that is Natuna Sea. So this is an effort by Indonesian government that is basically accepted by members of IHO, that South China Sea does not go all the way to Java Sea, but you have parts that is actually named Natuna Sea. So based on this document, South China Sea is not actually going that far to the south, bordering to Java Sea. So you have this development in the naming of this part of the world, South China Sea, and where it starts and where it ends, and where are the boundaries with countries around the South China Sea. Now, let's go deeper on the dispute itself. This is a map that is drawn by our colleague Andi Arsana from Gajah Mada University and Clive Schofield, a good friend of ours. This is a map that they draw to depict the locations, more or less, the conflict where they are located. So you have the Pratas Islands, Paracel Islands, Scarborough Shoal, and then you have the Spratlys. So this map basically gives us a picture on the locations of the disputed objects. And it is very important to keep underlining that in a sense, South China Sea is a sovereignty dispute. It is not about law of the sea. It's about who owns which rocks, who owns which islands, and this is sovereignty dispute. The law of the sea aspect automatically carries with the status of the island and the waters around it, but essentially, South China Sea dispute is about sovereignty dispute. It's not about law of the sea. And you know, we all know that in the law of the sea itself, there is no rules or stipulations about the owner of or how you own an island, or how you claim an island as such. And what are being disputed? You have small islands, you have islets, you have rocks, you have reefs. And frankly, until today, we don't know exactly the fixed number of the disputed objects, the features, whether it's 150, 160, we don't know exactly, because to be frank, the claimant parties, they never actually had a document that we can all consult about what are they claiming, where are they located, and what are the basis of the claim. So this is actually the fact that we see today. We can only draw from public statements or some documents here and there, but not exactly one single claim document as such. And most importantly, the number of the claimants. You have 6 claimants. And in many cases that we have seen, or at least that I have seen, in sovereignty dispute, you only have 2 claimants. Almost all, maybe I'm wrong, but I think in my study, only 2 countries normally have dispute on the sovereignty issue, like Indonesia with Malaysia, for instance, in the past, on Sipadan Likitan, or Malaysia and Singapore, for instance, on the status of Petra Branca. So it's always two countries. So this is the unique aspect and a complicating aspect, I would say, in the South China Sea dispute. 6 claimants. Now we start with from the public documents what each country says. So Brunei, in many of the public statements, says that the claim is based on the 1958 UK Orders Council. So it's an extension of continental shelf. So because of that part belongs to our continental shelf, therefore it is ours. So this is the claim of Brunei. China claims the 9 dash lines, the 1947 map, and then they just draw the map. We have seen this map in many occasions, and they also have claims about trading and fishing grounds since Han's dynasty, and they occupied and reclaimed a number of reefs, as you have already seen in many documents. Okay. So the basis of the claim is historical, is this map, and this is coming also from different documents that Chinese government has issued in the past. Malaysia, it's based on the continental shelf claim, so it's an extension of continental shelf. It's almost the same with the claim of Brunei. And there are 5 islands in Spratleys that is now occupied by Malaysia with military facilities. The Philippines also have a claim there, as we all know, and the basis is on Terra Nullius in 1956. So this is again a statement that we get from many public documents. Taiwan is complicated of the legal status of Taiwan itself. And it has similar claim to PRC, and it occupies and builds military facilities in the Itu Aba. So I think another complicating factors in this dispute is the legal status of Taiwan. Vietnam claim on base of historical document. Vietnam claim that these are parts of the province in Vietnam, and it's part of the French colonized territory. So it's an historical claim based on what the colonial power has done in the past. I'm quite aware with this argument because I was involved in the writing Indonesian arguments in Sipadan Ligitan case, and I can assure you, if you brought in historical claims to the court, you will lose because we have lost. We have lost. We know how the courts works. So, in my personal view, never try historical claim in sovereignty dispute. We have a very interesting case in Indonesia in 1928. Where we have a dispute between the Dutch and the Americans on an island called Palmas, Las Palmas. And the thinking was that according to the Americans, Las Palmas was somehow colonized by Spain. And because Spain left and left it to the US, so the US believed Las Palmas, or Miangas in our name, belonged to the US. The Dutch said, no, it didn't belong to you, it belonged to us. And then they had a claim, and then they went to arbitration in Switzerland. And the Swiss arbitrator said that the US historic claim was baseless. And the Dutch won the case because the Dutch has laws in the island, has administrations in the island. It has more legal documents and legal claim on the island itself. Thus, the principle of effectivité or effective occupation actually born from the case between the Dutch and the US in 1928. So that principle is being used all the way until today. is being used against us in the claim of Sibaran Ligitan, and we lost. And the court upheld the principle of effective occupations that it actually came from the Dutch winning from the American. So historical claim, good luck. So the maritime projections of those features, so we have the features themselves, and then you have the maritime projection of the features. And this is the result of the arbitrations between the Philippines and the PRC, and on 12 July 2016. And we all know the result, of course. There are different features and different islands and reefs, and the tribunal have very clear positions on the ability of those features to generate EEZ or continental shelf. So they have made a very clear statement and positions and legal judgment that a number of islands in Spratly Islands are legally rocks. They do not generate an exclusive economic zone or continental shelf. So let's look at the feature one by one. So this is Itu Aba. It's only have 12 nautical territorial sea. It's the largest high tide feature in the Spratly, 1.5 kilometers in length, 400 meters at the widest point. It has an airport, it has some buildings, lighthouse, runway. So if you look at the facilities there, and if you look at the map and the locations there, the court decided that it only has 12 nautical miles and no EEZ or continental shelf coming from Itu Aba. Titu Island, the same thing, only 12 nautical miles. The map on the right, you will see the locations in the Spratlys there, okay? And then Spratly itself, again, only 12 nautical miles. It's in the middle of the groups of the islands, if you look at the map on the left. Then the Southwest Caye, it's only 12 nautical miles only. It's there is in the green marking there in the group of the Spratlys. And the reef has no maritime zone whatsoever. So you look at the Mischief Reefs, it's there just below Eldad Reef and above Hughes Reef. Second Thomas Shoal, again, it's just a reef with no maritime zone whatsoever. Subi, the same thing. And these are all shows that the positions of the court, the arbitration, I'm sorry, it's very, very clear. So now we know the claim, and then we know the decision of the arbitration. So it seems that whoever owns those islands, they cannot claim more than 12 nautical miles by default, by law. Of course, people say that not everybody is happy with the decision of the arbitration, but still arbitration is part of the conventional law of the sea. And at some point, if there are disputes between countries on some islands somewhere around the world, there is no stopping of those countries to use this as a reference and then become jurisprudence. And then it becomes like the case of the Dutch and the US in 1925 about the effective occupation principle. So if more cases appear and more countries and more decisions are referring to this decision, then it will become international law. I'm sure of that. Now, these are the list of sovereignty disputes that has been resolved through the third parties. So that's the first one at the top is the case that I mentioned, the island of Las Palmas. And these are all cases you can consult in the decisions of the ICJ or arbitration or different forms, and you can see in all the decisions there are only two parties, there are only two countries. Okay, the object of decisions can be more than one. For instance, in Indonesia and Malaysia, we have two features, but just two countries. So it is easier to manage, I would say, because then you only have position A and position B, and each can argue historically or legally. But I will assure you that historical argument is not going to work. They only look at the legal argument. But again, this shows that when you want to resolve dispute, resolve meaning who you know exactly who owns what, okay, where and what location and what are the legal entitlements. That is the meaning of resolving the dispute. So resolving the dispute of over 100 plus features with 6 claimants is a very tough order. From those cases of sovereignty disputes, we see that dispute settlement is always through the third party, arbitration or tribunals, and dispute is always between two parties. And the ruling basis is the effective occupation or effectivité. And as I mentioned before, historical claim is always used as the main reason, and then you get defeated if you make that argument. Now, then the next question is, what are we going to do with South China Sea disputes? Are we going to resolve it or are we going to manage it? So if you want to resolve it, then is it possible to have all the claimants sit among themselves? I don't think so. Is it possible that they are willing to sign some kind of arrangement to go to arbitrations or third-party decisions? I'm not so sure. I don't think so. It's highly unlikely that they are willing to go to the third party. Even if one party withdraw, for instance, so they say, okay, I withdraw because I want to do, I want to make it less complicated, but still you have more than two parties. So thus the incentive for people or country who have less claim, they are not going to withdraw. So this is the dilemma there. So I think managing the dispute is much more plausible, it's achievable, and there are existing legal and policy frameworks to work on that. The legal framework, for instance, in UNCLOS, in locations of a semi-enclosed sea, you are obliged to work together, for instance, and you have the ASEAN Charter, where the ASEAN and the other countries are bound to create peace and stability in the region. You have the UN Charter. So you have different legal and policy frameworks to create an atmosphere where you can manage the dispute peacefully. So my view personally is that resolving the dispute is very difficult. It's highly unlikely, and managing the dispute is much more plausible, much more achievable. Now, this is the biggest challenge of everybody in our part of the world and beyond even. The sovereignty dispute within the context of strategic rivalry. I'm quoting here Professor Graham Allison from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. You can consult his work. It's available on the internet, of course. So according to his research, since the last 500 years, there are 16 competitions between the ruling power and the rising power. 12 cases end with war among states. So we see China as a meteoric rising power, and the US is a colossal ruling power. And the US presence in our region is based not only on geopolitics in general, but even law. So you have the treaty between Japan and the US, Korea and US. We have a treaty between Australia with the US. We have some other type of arrangement between Vietnam, even Thailand, Singapore. You have treaty with Vietnam within the US. Indonesia, we have no alliance treaty, but we have strategic partnership with the US. We have strategic partnership with Japan, with China. So we have all of these different arrangements in the regions that was actually trying to create an atmosphere where everybody can talk to each other peacefully. But the case of Professor Graham Allison is a very important case to look at it. The dynamic of the competitions creates fear in the ruling power. This is very classic, and arrogance in the rising power. This is what happened in all those cases. And the dimension of the strategic rivalry between USA and China is quite widespread. It's about trade, it's about tech, even COVID, geopolitical, maybe ideological. I don't know. I'm not so sure. And then the question of freedom of navigation. So it's across the board. It resembles the situations about competition between rising power and ruling power since the last 500 years. Now, the dynamic may turn worse from three aspects, from three analyses. I think the number one is psychology. Number one, actual conditions, psychology, and domestic politics. So actual conditions, China has a strong economic power and technological capabilities. I think it's important when people talk about a Cold War between the West and the East, the Soviet did not have economic power or technological power as big as China today. Okay. So it's a totally different ball game. And second, the interconnectivity is different. At that time, there is no such economic interconnectivity between the West and the East. And now the interconnectivity, it's very, very well woven to each other. And the psychological aspect, we have seen from the statements, the hawks on both sides, they have labeled each other as enemy. It's not good. And of course, we are looking at the hawks on both Washington and Beijing, and that may affect the dynamics of the relation. And we are now seeing the US elections, so we don't know the results, but the rhetorics are getting even stronger. And then the big geopolitical question is, are confrontation and competition unavoidable? Yes. You know, competition is the nature of human being. Sometimes even confrontation is the nature of human being. But is the war unavoidable? The war is a choice and it should be avoidable. But if you look at the World War I here in Europe, miscalculation, misperception can ignite war. So this is that we are afraid. I am afraid personally because South China Sea is a flashpoint, and flashpoint could trigger this miscalculation and misperception. So this is something that we all need to work hard to avoid. Now, specifically for us, Indonesia, we have agreement on continental shelf with Malaysia, 1969. No one protested. China did not protest it. We have REEZ law in 83, deposited to the UN. No one protested. We have law on territorial waters in 96. So no one protested. China did not protest. So we have all these exercises under UNCLOS that we provided, and nobody protested as such. We never claim the islands or reefs in South China Sea, and all of our islands in Natuna and Anambas are entirely within our sovereignty, never claimed by anybody. We are, of course, a country who work very hard in establishing the UNCLOS itself in the 70s, in the 60s, we sent a lot of delegations in the conventions making at that time. So we therefore are one of the very, I would say we are very much faithful to implement UNCLOS. So we believe that it's there, everything in the UNCLOS. So all have been taken care of in the UNCLOS. So if there's argument, I know that there's an argument saying that, well, UNCLOS is not ruling everything. It's true, but maritime zones and maritime claims are all being ruled in UNCLOS. It's very clear. And EEZ is very clear, 200 nautical miles. And the fact that you cannot just draw a line and then claim EEZ is there in the convention. So the convention basically arrange and stipulate all the basic issue in the law of the sea. We sent a diplomatic note in 2009, a long time ago, and this is our note. So it's just a very interesting part of our note. So you look at this comparator. On the left side is a language that Indonesian diplomatic note sent to the UN in 2010. On the right side is the language of the PCA tribunal. On the left side, we said the small features in South China Sea do not deserve EEZ or continental shelf of their own. On the PCA language, they're basically saying that all these small features are legally rocks that do not generate EEZ or continental shelf. So we pretty much have the same thinking on how small features in South China Sea should be treated. We are using the word deserve. It's much more, I would say emotional, trying to see justification, whereas the word generate is much more mathematical and linguistic, mean produce sequencing of items, mathematical approach. So it's a different wordings, but I think the message is the same. And the one on the left, we wrote it in 2010, and the one in 2016. So if you want to make a bet on horse, you ask me. So maybe I can I can give you a good analysis. Now, the conclusions. So are we going to settle or manage South China Sea dispute? I believe that the sovereignty dispute can only be settled through the third parties. And if they really want to settle the dispute, then they have to think through going to the third party. But I don't think it's going to be possible. And dispute settlements on bilateral level is also unlikely because of the overlapping claim by itself. Okay, so dispute settlements in the means of determining who owns what, who owns which island and which rock, it's impossible. And managing the dispute, I think, is easier to achieve. And managing the dispute is important to avoid armed conflict between the US and China that currently are in the middle of strategic rivalry. So I think in the end, it's our responsibility, all of us in our capacity as individuals or as public officials to try to make our region as a region of peace and stability, that we can develop our economy and we can increase the relation between people in a much better situations. Nobody wants war. It's not going to benefit anyone, and Asia is the center of the attention of the world. I think we Asians, we need also to show to the world that we can manage dispute among ourselves. So once again, thank you very much for listening to my presentations. I'm looking forward to have a great discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Oegroseno, for the very enlightening presentation. I was really ashamed of myself because I was always talking about the South China Sea, but I didn't even know how it was shaped. right? So it was a shame, but now I know it. So it's a good news. All right, let me now invite Professor Nobukatsu Kanehara, visiting professor at GRIPS. Professor Kanehara served as the former Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Secretary General of the National Security Secretariat. He draws on substantial experience serving at the highest levels in the government of Japan, where he was recognized as a leading diplomat and strategic voice on international affairs. Professor Kanehara will speak for about 20 minutes. Professor Kanehara, the screen is yours. Professor Kanehara, can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you for having me. Shirai Sensei, Michita Sensei, Your Excellency Ambassador Oegroseno, I'm happy to join you today. I'm going to make 4 points today. First one is we have to look back a bit the history of the South China Sea. We're talking about Senkaku, Natsuna, Spratly, the Paracel, Scarborough, but we have to see the whole picture of the sea. The South China Sea and the Spratly Islands in particular, Japan claimed these islands because Japanese Navy dominated South China Sea before the war, and we claimed the sovereignty over these Spratly Islands and abandoned these islands in the San Francisco Peace Treaty. At that time, the islands were called Shinnan Islands, that means New South Islands, and Japan governed these islands through the governor of Taiwan. That's the reason why Taiwan has Taipingdao. And before that, we are competing with the French, because French dominated the Indochina Peninsula. We're competing with them, and at the outset of the Pacific War, we kicked them out and took the old islands. And then everybody's now back, and Vietnam took over, of course, the French Indochina. They came in. Taiwan continued to stay there. And of course, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, they claimed their own islands. And China is the latecomer. And before that, before the competition between France and Japan, the South China Sea was the crossroads. It's Times Square of the sea, and it connects the Arab Persian merchants, Indian merchants, with the Chinese merchant, Japanese merchant, of course, and south east the Asian merchants. These are the very important places for the commerce. The big cities were very prosperous, and the sea was free, and nobody was interested in controlling the sea before the Europeans came. Europeans took over the islands, took over the commerce strongholds, and they spread into the continent, in particular after Industrial Revolution. And China claims these islands these days. They say it's our sea, but South China Sea is bigger, much bigger than the Mediterranean. Even Roman Empire did not claim the Mediterranean as a whole. Ottoman Empire neither. And nobody can do that. In particular, 500 years they were under alien rules, Manchus, Mongols. They are horse riders. They had absolutely no interest in the sea. And before that, Ming Dynasty, they said that to have a trade with China, they have to come down to Chinese and to become tributary states. Otherwise, trade was refused. The sea was taken by the pirates. The most famous pirates were Japanese pirates. And the South China Sea was never under control of China. And this is the history. Suddenly, 2006, China filed a sheet of paper to the United Nations saying that South China Sea is historically Chinese Sea. And it was so outrageous. So nobody made serious comments. Everybody thought it's a sort of joke. And But China is now serious about it, and they're implementing this concept by force. And it's astonishing. And we checked all the archives. Where is the material to substantiate their claim? We found a paper, sheet of paper. It was Kuomintang map for the kids, and it claimed South China Sea with 9 dotted line. And these are newly fabricated history made in the 20th century. And this map continues to the north and to the south, to the west. This map shows today's China and ideal China. Dotted lines say today's China, and this map continues. It does not include Taiwan, does not include Korean Peninsula, simply because it was under Imperial Japan's control. But they claimed the large part of Siberia, large part of Indochina Peninsula, and the ideal China includes almost all the Eurasian continents. It is absurd. And we have to push back the Laos, and with the litigation with the Philippines, it also said this is simply groundless. The Law of the Sea Tribunal, and they had the Arbitration Tribunal, and Arbitration Tribunal just made judgments that this is historically and legally not substantiated. Mr. Pompeo, this year, lastly, Americans said claims of China for the South China Sea is groundless and illegal. And this must be the position of every country. My second point is why China doing this? Why China is implementing this expansionism in maritime zone? There are different thoughts coming in. It's all mixed up. The first one is they need strategic depth. And Liu Huaqing is a naval officer. He wrote an article, famous one, in 1982 when the UNCLOS was made. And he said 3 million square meters sea around China is Chinese sea. And this is totally against international law. And nobody took it seriously at that time. But China is serious about this concept. And this is a very wrong concept. And there could be 2 reasons why China claims this. One is the brown water navy strategy. Brown water navy tried to defend their near sea. His article is titled Near Sea Defense. But 3 million square kilometers is not near sea, it's high seas. That includes the Yellow Sea, and then East China Sea, and maybe half of South China Sea. That they claimed as a defense zone of China. And this is totally wrong. Strong navy, blue water navy, try to push back the territorial water and try to guarantee the freedom of maneuvering in the ocean. This is blue water navy strategy. China had only brown water strategies, brown water navy at that time, so they implemented their brown water navy tactics in the sea and violating international law. And second is maybe they're implementing the army's strategy in the sea. And China was invaded so often by the horse riders, Manchus, Mongols, and for 2,000 years they are fighting back them. And China has no concept of border. China's border is a border area. It's huge wall, and beyond that, that's border area. It's not border. Border area means horse riders so strong, and they invaded everywhere, and they move around. They have no capital. They move around, and they are good shooter, archery. So China tried to push them back as far as possible, but very often China was defeated, and they were governed by these horse riders for centuries. That's their history. So for China, it is important to have a border area, a very big one, to push back enemy. For Chinese, the Mongolians, Manchus, others, they all became Chinese in the end. That's the strength of China. That's as a civilization. But newcomers in modern time, modern Japanese, Americans, Europeans, they just raped China. They did not become Chinese. So they want to push back invaders from the sea. So the strategic depth in the sea is their strategic thinking. And this is a very wrong strategy because the sea is very different. Sea must be open to everybody. China has a very strong navy today. They have to change their strategy, but they're not yet there. Soviet Union, today's Russia, they changed the policy around 1980s. They were sticking to the defense of the near sea. After they acquired a huge blue water navy, they joined Americans to keep the ocean open, And China must change their strategy, but they are not yet there. Another aspect of their expansionism is the revenge of the history. In 1989, the Tiananmen massacre, they massacred kids crying freedom, and the door for the democracy was firmly shut. Before that, Hu Yaobao was talking about Chinese democracy with Prime Minister Nakasone. We hope that China could be like us one day, but Tiananmen killed that dream. But Deng Xiaoping opened the door to the foreign investments, and he was greatly successful. He'll be remembered for that. But communism as ideology is dead. Today's China is no longer communist, and they needed something else to support their legitimacy of CCP. And what Deng Xiaoping brought in instead of communism as ideology was patriotism. In patriotism, they made a history that China was raped for 1 century or 2 centuries. We have to push back. We have to have our own identity, own nation, own sphere of influence. And it's very dangerous because nationalism, when injected too much in the first phase of industrialization, in the first phase of forming the nation states, it can be poisonous. The poison is now spreading all over China because China is rising. The Lehman shock, it was a big shock, and the West was shaken very much. Americans had G20. In G20 summit meeting, China was the main player. And China thought wrongly that this is Chinese time. It's too early to say that. But China believed that now they can carve out their own sphere of influence. And this is wrong, but as far as they believe it, we have to be prepared for that. My third point is China leaving the West? And can the West engage China in the future? And I think we can do that. As Ambassador Oegroseno said, we have to continue to keep China on the track. The engagement is not begging, engagement is not soliciting, but as far as the West and the liberal nations are united, we can still engage China. This is not begging. This is the persuasion, mutual persuasion on the equal footing. And American military power is still huge. China can challenge that, not yet. American military budget is 4 times bigger than China. Chinese military budget is bigger than Japan plus France plus UK plus Germany. The military budget is huge, but American military budget is still 4 times bigger than Chinese one. China is now 3 times bigger in terms of economy today, bigger than Japan, but China is still 70% of the United States. And with US, Europe, Japan, India, ASEAN, we can very easily go beyond 50% of world GNP. That means in terms of economy too, we can still engage China. Lastly, the liberal order is standing up. Liberal order is in question in Europe with Brexit, in the United States, America First policy, in Asia, 1980s, 1990s. Many nations turned to democracy. They're very proud democracy, and they are standing up. The liberal order is now at creation in Asia, and China cannot stop it. The history is on our side, so we can do that. And China could follow us. Any nation can be industrialized. We proved that, and China is following us. And China will be nation states. It's very difficult now because they are saying Han's nationalism. That's alien. It's Mongolians and Tibetans and Uyghurs and even Taiwanese. They have still difficulties there, but there'll be a nation state one day. And then there'll be a democracy. It's a necessity of history, but simply this process takes 1 century. So we have to face China, very difficult and very angry China, maybe up to 2040, 2050. So coming 2 decades, 3 decades are the most important period for us to engage Chinese. The FOIP is the concept for that, to live with China, to keep stability with China, and to build some trust with China and adjust interests with China. FOIP is necessary. That means all the liberal nations in Asia, Europe, Americans must be coordinating together. Quad is the basis for that. We have 2 allies, Japan and Australia, in the Pacific, and then India is a coming superpower, and this is a basis, but this is the framework of FOIP, but crown jewel of FOIP is ASEAN. ASEAN multilateralism is the typical successful multilateralism in Asia. And if you compare that with Central Asia is very different. It's Russian system, so big ones bully the small ones everywhere. And ASEAN is very different. We have to spread this ASEAN success to whole region of Indo-Pacific. Finally, I have to say the unilateral change of status quo by China is illegal. We tend to say that this is territorial disputes. This is not territorial dispute. China is changing the status quo by force, and this is simply against the obligation of peaceful settlement of disputes. And China is so careful. They never confront Americans militarily. That's the reason why they use Haijin. Haijin is the Coast Guard of China under Chinese Navy's control, and they use huge number of vessels, the fishing vessels, and they kick out the fishermen of Philippines, of Vietnam, and the Indonesians. They try to disturb the exploitation of oil by Vietnamese and Russians, and they are coming every day to Japan's Senkaku Islands. This is not the issue of territorial title. This is not the issue of innocent passage. This is the issue of the permanent violation of sovereignty of somebody else, and permanent violation of international law that stipulates that every nation must settle disputes by peaceful means. And even though China does not use military forces, this is apparently against international law. You can't invade others by police force neither. And international law never says if you use police force, you can invade others. It does not say that. Even the police force, they can't change the status quo unilaterally. That's my message. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanehara. So with that, we have a lot to talk about. So what we are going to do now is to open the floor screen for Q&A, first to the panelists on the screen. But in the meantime, I would like to ask other people who are not on the screen to ask questions. You have 2 ways of asking questions. One is you can simply write down your questions by using Q&A button at the bottom, or you can raise your hand by pressing the button at the bottom and wait for your turn, which can come after we take questions from the panelists on the screen. So let me ask the panelists or those on the screen to ask questions or make comments. And if you have any, please raise your hand electrically or physically. Anyone? If not, I would like to ask Professor Shiraishi to open up.
Okay, thank you. Let me just ask one question to Ambassador Oegroseno. I understand the Indonesian government quite recently decided to be very frank about Indonesian government position on the Hague judgment. And why is it this timing that the Indonesian government made its position open?
Professor Shiraisi, I think if you look at our positions since 2009, we are quite open actually into the issue of the entitlement of the disputants in our part of the region. So, as a matter of fact, as I showed you, the language that we use in our diplomatic note to the SecGen of the UN in 2009, basically the same structure with the decisions of the PCA, the Hague arbitration. So we have a continuous position is I think the same since 2009. Our recent note is actually in reference to 2009, so it's not much of a difference actually in terms of how we establish our positions. 2009, it was the first time that we actually openly have a position on South China Sea through a diplomatic note. It was, I think, the marker is that diplomatic note in 2009. So the current note that we sent was simply trying to refer to those 2009 and also to link it with the current situations. And we have also had a very clear public statement in 2017 on the issue of the decision itself, decisions of the tribunal itself. We made a policy of changing our maps to try to implement, if you will, the decision of the PCA, because we have negotiations with different countries and they are using very small islands. And, we see this as a way for Indonesia also to try to follow the decision of the tribunal. So we are not only open in the public statement, but we actually adapt our domestic regulations with this new decision. Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have two hands raised. So let me invite Professor Takagi.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Oegroseno. My name is Yusuke Takagi at RIPS. I have two questions about South China Sea. And of course, Professor Kanehara also mentioned that ASEAN is a crown jewel. When we think about South China Sea and the role of ASEAN, we cannot forget about the discussion about code of conduct. But as you said, resolution is really tough to achieve. Then what can we expect from the discussion of code of conduct? This is the first question. And the second question is about the role of Indonesia, because Indonesian government has played a very important role to manage South China Sea issue ever since 1990s. And in history, so for almost 30 years, Indonesia played a very important role in my understanding. And in 2019, ASEAN declared ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. But this question has something to do with Professor Shiraishi's question. Why that time? Why only 2019 ASEAN declared this ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The process of the code of conduct is still going. I have a discussion with a different colleague, and they're quite confident. It's not an easy negotiation. It's ongoing, but we are quite sure that it will become into a document that everybody needs to work together. I think there is one aspect that was taken out from code of conduct, which is I don't remember the terms, but arrangement between the militaries, between the Navy. So because we believe it was crucial and we could not wait. So that element was taken out and it was discussed separately, and now it's become already some sort of a singularity code of conduct among the Navy. It's called the CUAS, I think, CUAS, conduct of unexpected meeting or whatever of the Navy at sea.
Yeah, conduct of unexpected encounters at sea.
At sea, yes.
CUAS,
yes. Thank you.
CUES.
Yeah, CUAS. So the CUAS was actually part of the code of conduct, but it was then taken out because it will be too long to wait, and this is emergency, if we will. So it was discussed, and I think between the navies, they have the CUAS already. So the other aspect of the code of conduct, I believe it's on the ongoing discussion, and they've been. I've seen different movement, and we believe that we will have it, supposedly sooner because of the COVID. It's been postponed. On the issue of the role of Indonesia, I think we have the workshop. If you're well aware, I think the workshop is still going on. It's still one of the way for us to create trust among different players. Although it's informal, but it's at least there is some channels, that we managed to still have some discussions on this particular issue, and it will continue to go on annually. Now, the Indo-Pacific came out, I think, initially was not 2019. I think it was Foreign Minister Marty Natalegawa who had the idea, I think before 2014 even, or between the 2013, 2012, I don't remember exactly the date, but it was launched, the idea. If you look at the news, I think you can look at the analysis. It's basically an idea to broaden the existing architecture in our part of the world to be much more together. The different architecture between ASEAN and different relevant partners at the time. And this, I think, was the key message. And then I think 2019, 18, things get changed. And I think geopolitics have changed as well dramatically, as opposed to 2012 even, or 13. So that the interest of different parts of the world is also becoming much more and more focused to our part of the world. So I think the Indo-Pacific idea that Minister Marty said in 2013 or so became took the momentum, and many countries are in our part of the world is actually having a strong policy on that. And even Germany, just recently on the 1st of September, Germany launched its new policy guidelines on Indo-Pacific. And from my discussion here in Berlin, as a presidency of the EU, Germany plans to bring this up at the EU level. So I was ambassador in the European Union 2010-2015. And along with ASEAN colleague, we criticized the EU at that time. And it is public criticism, not only private. And we told them that the EU, when they look at Asia, they look only at China, and then China, and then China again. So we're basically complaining that East Asia and Asia Pacific is wider than that. And it seems now that Germany, as the major player in EU, and also France, they are looking at our part of the world differently. So the Indo-Pacific strategy of Germany hopefully will go to European Union, and even this year, hopefully there will be an EU strategic paper on Indo-Pacific. So I think it's very important to see the trends across the world. And of course, we want to see what happened in November in Washington. So this is a different factors. I think to give a short answer, Professor Takagi, is the dynamics, I think, of the region is different. So the idea in the past that seems to be too academic and not too relevant, but you put them into 2018-19, then the conditions actually ripe for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Professor, yeah, but before that, let me actually ask Professor Shiraishi. He has something to add.
Thank you very much. Let me just add a few, a little bit to Ambassador Arif Oegroseno. I once interviewed President Yudhoyono a few years ago and asked why he used the word Indo-Pacific in the year 2010. And his answer was, in view of the East Asia Summit, to include American and Russian presidents, he thought that it would be strategic if you shift the word from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific, because that would make Indonesia right in the middle of the map and underline the importance of strategic importance of Southeast Asia. And I fully understood his point. This is just my addition.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I will go now to Professor Kikuchi, but in the meantime, I'm seeing a lot of the faces of our students at GRIPS. Let me introduce them, young faces who are appearing on the screen. Those are our students. So, but none of them are raising their hands, unfortunately. And so I'm going to give them C if they don't ask any questions. So when while I'm taking all comments, right? So while I'm taking other people's questions and comments, you think about something and come up with something. I'll come back to you. Okay, Professor Kikuchi, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Oegroseno. Listening to your presentation, I remember a long time ago, I worked for the Ambassador Hashim Jalal from Indonesian Embassy in foreign ministries. I worked sometime for the workshop on South China Sea organized by Ambassador Hashim Jalal, 1990s. Yeah. And I have one question. The United States have been conducting freedom of navigation operation, and now U.S. have been conducting quite often. And also other countries, including Japan, we are conducting naval exercises in the South China Sea areas quite often. And you mentioned the managing dispute could be possible. So in that context, managing the disputes, how do you evaluate, assess, freedom of navigation, non-claimant countries in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Freedom of navigation is not something unusual. It's in the convention. All countries have interest of freedom of navigation. Even under the law of the sea, the landlocked states, countries without seas, they have right to freedom of navigation. So it's part of the obligations that the member or the parties of UNCLOS have to follow. Indonesia itself, we are doing a lot of freedom of navigation activities around the world. We have a couple of vessels who We have our warship went to Milan, for instance, 2017, very interesting. We have one warship training that went in 38 countries in the last 7 years or so, Professor. So, you know, as long as it's in the international waters, it should not be a problem. Because everybody has the right for freedom of navigation. Now, we believe many parts of the South China Sea is, you know, not belong to anyone. There are some part of high seas, some other are EEZ. It means that the freedom of navigation has to be available for everybody to use it. You know. I think if you want to reduce the tension, probably an offer of you know, joint exercise would be something that is good to be done. There is a possibility of having a joint exercise on the disaster relief, for instance. There's a possibility of different type of exercises in the conventional law of the sea that is possible to be done by all the countries involved. So I think, you know, it's, I agree with Professor Kanehara about engaging, you know, engaging all the players in the region. I think it's very important to have also joint exercises with all different players. So if one country is doing FONOP, it's normal. It's not strange, I would say. It's not unusual because it's in the law of the sea convention. It's customary with international law. So it's not illegal. I think the issue is not so much about the legality or illegality of freedom of navigation operation, but it's about, you know, how you bring into the picture different countries, different players to do them jointly, because we like it or not, the freedom of navigations in South China Sea is part of the economic lifeline of the world. You know, your export, your import of the country in East Asia, country in Southeast Asia is very much depend upon freedom of navigation. So I think it's very important for us to underline that. Thank you.
All right, so now I see many hands raised by our students, so who are aiming at A grades, right? So let me ask them to join us. Let me ask Mio first, and actually let me bundle two questions together. So I'll ask Mio and then Koichi to ask questions or say provide comments. Mio, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I have two questions. One is to Ambassador and one is to Professor Kanehara. And my first question is that I've never thought about resolving and managing the disputes, so I was impressed about your idea. But what do you think about the meaning of the case arbitration court's ruling of arbitration court, because it costs a lot for the countries who take the court. But what is the meaning if we want to manage the dispute? It is just one of the factors. Can I say two?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah,
state your questions.
Thank you. And my second question is to Professor Kanehara. And as you said, I was surprised in this July, Pompeo of the US said that China's claim is totally unlawful. And I think it is the stage is went next step of his state. But what do you think about the Pompeo's statement? Is this just a one statement, or this is changing the stage? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. And before we ask, presenters to answer them, the questions, please let me ask Koichi Yoneda to ask questions.
Yes, sir. Thank you. My question is to Mr. Ambassador. It's great honor for me to hear your presentation and make question, Your Excellency. I'm Koichi Yoneda, now studying GRIPS. When we are talking about South China Sea as the front line, the China are touching island countries in the Pacific beyond the 9-dash line. They are changing not only the line, but also changing the color in the Pacific, I think. I do not know the Indonesian or ASEAN attitude to this issue. How do you see this further Chinese spread attitude to the Pacific? Thank you.
Okay, so please, Ambassador Oegroseno, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much. The meaning of arbitration, Mio, it is very important to understand that the arbitration was not about the resolution of the dispute. It's not about the settlement of the dispute. It's not about who owns what, but the arbitration was specifically asked with a set of questions on the entitlement of those islands. Because if you look at the Convention of Law of the Sea, the Law of the Sea, Article 121, does not actually define which island that has EEZ or continental shelf. They just say island is a naturally formed part of the earth, and therefore you can use that as a base point. So it's a naturally formed, it's not the reclamations. But which part of the island, how small, how big, that can have 12 mile, 24 mile, or 200 mile, it's not specifically mentioned. So that's why the arbitration was aimed on the status of those islands. So one, they had the decisions on which island that is only have 12 miles, which island there's no land at all. We then can look at the map and say that on the basis of the decisions, then the maximum title of each big island is only 12 miles. So it means there is no EEZ. So it means beyond that is high seas. So I think that is the meaning of that. The most important part of that the arbitration is the fact that indirectly, my personal opinion, the arbitration give us, all of us, an understanding that which one belongs to whoever, we don't know, and which one it's high seas. And if we look at the decision, I think I would claim that beyond the 200 nautical miles of Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, or Brunei, in that part, you only have high seas and plots of features with 12 nautical miles of sovereign right. So that's maximum that they can have. So I think this is the important meaning of the arbitration ruling. So it's very crucial for us. And even on this basis, we are looking at our own internal policy and adjust that. Now, on the Chinese policy in the Pacific, I think ASEAN, we deal with one country in the Pacific, PNG. PNG is a very big neighbor of ASEAN. We have engagement with them. I think individually, Indonesia has a good relation with many of the Pacific countries, with Fiji, for instance, and we have special connections and link with the Pacific countries on the issue of the rising of sea level and on the issue of the fragility of those small island states in relation to the climate change. So I think in terms of geopolitics, you know, we don't have that kind of arrangement with the country in the Pacific. So the position that we have with Pacific Islands and Pacific countries are much more on the climate related situations.
Okay, Professor Kanehara, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Ando-san, for your question. The meaning of Pompeo's speech is this is a big change of American policy, and we have to know that the strategic framework is not permanent. It changes over time. Americans needed Stalin to defeat Hitler and the Imperial Japan, and Americans needed Mao to face Russians for half a century during the Cold War. And after the Cold War, everybody believed or tried to believe that China will be like us one day. Tiananmen was a big failure for China, but Deng Xiaoping opened the door for foreign investments, and through economic development, China would be like us one day. That was our expectation. Even from 1990s, Japan started to doubt this, and early 21st century, we strongly doubted this. Only Pentagon concurred with us. But Japanese business community, American business community, and American government as a whole still believe that we could change China in the future. But lastly, American size is far bigger than ours. Our size is 1/3 of China today economically. Americans are far bigger than China, and militarily they are far stronger. They still believe that they could engage China, but they depended upon Chinese goodwill. And this was a failure. And Pompeo finally said, no, China is leaving us. And Xi Jinping's policy is a bit different from the predecessors. He made clear that he will not be a Gorbachev. He will stand up. He will continue to carve out some Chinese sphere of influence. China will make their own rules. And this is very different China. And Pompeo, showed that Americans are finally awakened. But I have to say, one element is involved here. It's coronavirus. 200,000 people died in the United States. We lost 20,000 in Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Americans lost 200,000 in coronavirus. And Trump administration can never accept that this is their failure. They say this is because of Chinese failure. That's the reason why this Trump government is very strong against China. If Mr. Biden is elected in 2 weeks' time, the rhetoric would be a bit softer, but because of Chinese size, their strategic directions, the American policy will not change drastically. They would take a harder position. This is not simply confrontational. How to engage China, realigning their allies, friends, and waiting for Chinese change. Maybe it takes decades, but can we cope with China in that way? That should be the strategy of Biden. So there would be no softening of American policy. Even the president would change in the future. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, actually, I'm afraid that people who are not on the screen are getting very bored, right? So let me take their questions, and I would like to ask Mr. Ayabe, Satoki Ayabe, to ask questions. Go ahead. Mr. Ayabe, would you like to mute yourself? Go ahead. Could you identify yourself and ask questions? You are on. Please go ahead.
My question.
Can you identify yourself?
I'm Satoki Aibe from Kyoto University School of Government. My question is that what kind of role is expected to Vietnam as the chair country of ASEAN 2020? Will there be any changes after switching chair countries after 2021 or 2022? Thank you.
All right, so let me invite now Christopher Castro to ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Christopher Castro. I was a student here at GRIPS last year. I am from the Philippines. And I would like to ask the Indonesian ambassador about what is Indonesia's view regarding, in the basis of settling versus managing the dispute, what is Indonesia's view regarding FONOP's actions and Quad actions within the region? Does it help manage the dispute or settle the dispute? Thank you.
Ambassador, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you. I think Vietnam as a chair of ASEAN should maintain the current ASEAN policy. It's going to be under Vietnamese leadership, of course, to push and finish the code of conduct. I think it's part of the job of the chair, I would say. And secondly, I think in managing the relation with China, with the dialogue partners of ASEAN, I think the chair it's required, to maintain the fundamental position of ASEAN, which is to create peace and stability in the region. So I think by default, it's very clear what a chair of ASEAN must and should do. But in a specific policy decision, I have no preview on that. For instance, like in EU, Germany was the chair or the president of the EU for 6 months. But then suddenly under Germany launched the Indo-Pacific guidelines. So it was not discussed before. People don't actually knew what's going to happen. But then we have the new German guidelines on Indo-Pacific regions. It's a very interesting policy. And it's also very interesting also to see that Germany is going to bring it up at the EU level. So same with any chair of ASEAN. I think by default you have to do whatever you are required to do under the ASEAN Charter. But I think in specific policy, I would not know what would be the policy. Now, Castro on the FONOP, I've already mentioned before. FONOP is not really in relation to managing, not in relation to the solving the dispute, because it's about freedom of navigation operations. But what I mentioned before was that freedom of navigation operation is normal. It's been done by many countries. Freedom of navigation is very important. Even a landlocked states has the right to freedom of navigation. The key issue, I think, is about any activities that may create sensitivity. It's better to be done together because in the Convention of Law of the Sea, you are obliged actually to have a joint exercises, joint activity in some particular area. And one of the particular area that we can think through is actually, if possible, military exercises, naval exercises jointly, or even exercises in the disaster management. So it's possible to have those parts to manage the peace and stability in the region.
Right, thank you very much. Now I see the professors are getting frustrated, right? So let me go to Professor Shin.
Okay, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the talk. I'm not a political scientist, but this talk is very interesting for me. You know, I'm a professor of GRIPS, but I'm a Chinese. I have a question for Professor Kanehara. You know, in your talk, you basically suggest that the Japan, ASEAN country, US, and the Western countries, they should jointly to be against China's expansionism. But I have a question that is, China is not a former Soviet Union. China is a country with unmatched economic power. You mentioned that, you know, US military power, you know, is not matched by China, that's for sure. But in terms of economic power, what I mean is, you know, the leverage that China can use the money to support investment in developing country, and China's potential market, which will be very, you know, profitable for the future growth of a Western country. That gave China, you know, the huge leverage in this kind of a game. So I'm not sure, you know, how stable the coalition you called, which try to either, you know, confront with China's expansionism or try to contain China, how successful and stable those kind of coalition might be. This one. Another thing is, in front of China's, you know, like economic muscle, you know, many countries, they will do the calculation. On the one hand, they might be concerned about China's threat or expansionism, or, you know, the dispute or free, you know, like navigation in South China Sea. On the other hand, I think many countries are attractive by, you know, the opportunity which will be offered and can be offered by Chinese market and the investment from China. So for those countries that are concerned about the South China Sea, you know, for example, Philippines, or they're concerned about China's assertiveness in the international community and the expansionism, how those countries will eventually benefit their economic, you know, like interest with their so-called national security, or their concern about the potential threat from China.
Let me ask Professor Furuya for questions or comments.
Thank you very much. My name is Professor Kentaro Furuya. I'm teaching here at GRIPS and a professor at the Japan Coast Guard Academy. I have two questions for each of the presenter. First of all, Ambassador Oegroseno, I'd like to know the relationship of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or AOIP, and then FOIP. ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific AOIP is often referred to as a ASEAN version of FOIP. But I wonder if there is any policy implementation or action taken in accordance with AOIP, and what was the impact to the region? This is my question. And Professor Kanehara, you mentioned that you highlighted the importance of the liberal order, and FOIP is one of the framework to maintain liberal order at sea. My question is, what Japan should do for maintenance of liberal order in South China Sea and you know, at maritime area in general, and then for the liberal order and FOIP implementation, since the FOIP may be different in Japan and that of in United States or other nations, what is necessary for the liberal order? Thank you very much.
you very much, Ambassador and Professor. Would you like to respond?
I would like to give the floor to Professor Kanehara first.
Oh, either way. Shall I speak first? But thank
Yeah,
you.
either way is fine. Please go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Singh. I never use the word confrontation. I never use the word containment. I said this is engagement. This is a grand strategy for engagement of China. And to engage China, we need stability with China. And international politics, it's not very easy for the strong to listen to the weak. And if this happens, no, China would listen to nobody except the United States. So we have to be realigned, united, and then we can talk to China and persuade each other and adjust the interests and build trust. And if China is very strong, we talk one-on-one to China bilaterally. We have to be at the mercy of their interests. That's the reason why I'm saying that we have to keep balance with China. For that purpose, the liberal nations, free nations, must be realigned. And then the purpose is not to confront China, not to contain China, but to keep stability with China and trust, and to build trust, adjust interests. This is the purpose. I have to say, rule of law, values, freedom, democracy, China has different idea. But for economic parts, we are connected. And supply chains are deeply inside of China in many nations, Germany, Japan, even United States. They are not Soviet Union. That would continue. But there are parts where interests are different. That's on national security parts. High-tech parts are a bit different. And there, some decoupling is happening. And I think it is necessary. That would hurt some economic interests. But there should be balance between national security and economy, and both sides would accept that. And for the developing countries, China is, of course, very important for everybody, for advanced industrial nations, or even for the developing nations. For developing nations, what the West, what the G7 nations, for example, are doing is, we are not competing with China, defeat China in money competition. What we are trying to do is to show options. China is not the only one option. You have the options. You have choice. You can choose. That's what we are going to do. And the market force is cruel. And the Chinese industrialization is because of the market force. And nobody can stop it. China takes back its own position. Size in the world history, that's their rights. But there are some strategic parts. In some parts, China lends too much money and take ports, mountains, airfields. We don't like it. And sustainability of the loans and the economic growth of recipient countries are very important. And for them, we have to show that they have other options. That's what we are going to do. That's okay. And for Mr. Furuya, FOIP, what Japan can do. What Japan is doing, there are three levels. One is, as I said, strategic balance. The American commitment is necessary. Without Americans, we are at the mercy of China. Nobody can stand up against China one-on-one. So we need Americans, and American Pacific allies should be taken into our efforts. That's Australia. Korea is a bit confused these days. In the future, we have talked to the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnamese, but for the moment, we are consolidating Quad. For strategic stability with China, and then economic affairs, we are implementing TPP and working upon RCEP. Japan's policy for free trade is we are making matrix, connecting dots vertically, horizontally, so that economic integration would be enhanced using market force. Chinese strategy is a bit different. China is in the center. They make a star shape connections. The China is in the center, they negotiate one-on-one. That's very much similar to Russian pipeline strategy. There are some differences of strategies here, but we wish to push forward the free trade. And Japan is a great investor nation today, no longer exporting nation. For investing nation, the free trade system is vital, and this is our national interest. For maritime cooperation, it's very important. Sea is so vast, and no one navy can dominate the sea. And to keep the ocean open, the big maritime nations should cooperate. And this is where we have to go. And finally, in terms of values and transition of China and transformation of China, it's not easy for the Westerners to understand China. We do. We're neighbors for 2,000 years. We live with them. And they're smart people. And as I said, industrialization would end up with democracy usually, but it takes time. Xi Jinping is on the opposite side today, but we should not think that his successor and his next successor, by 2050, they might change. Then we have to persuade people that this is engagement, not confrontation. Okay, thank you.
Ambassador Oegroseno.
Thank you very much, Professor Furuya. I think if you look at the ASEAN Indo-Pacific, there are a number of concrete aspects that we can work together: maritime security, connectivity, climate change. Connectivity, I think, includes also trade, and I think what Professor Kanehara mentioned makes a lot of sense, where the trade relationships will hopefully create more interdependence, regardless of how many different metrics countries are developing. But establishing an architecture of trade in our part of the world, the RCEP, the ASEAN FTA trades, Indonesia have FTA trade with Japan, for instance. I think it's a very important aspect in building a strong blocks of Indo-Pacific. So the key activities, I believe, is how different countries of the partner of ASEAN can be part of this idea of the Indo-Pacific. And we have the Japan Indo-Pacific, the US Indo-Pacific, and then now we have the European or German Indo-Pacific. I think that could blend quite well in terms of creating much more robust economic relation with different parties. The key issue, I think, Professor Kanehara basically said in relation to the question of Professor Singh, I think, I don't think it's proper for countries to choose, okay, because the economic interdependence today is so deep, okay. Imagine if different countries are forced to choose between the US or China, okay. If they choose one side and strategic framework and strategic dimension of cooperation changes, and if one day in the future US and China becomes close again, these countries that choose sides, they are not in a good positions. So I advise countries not to choose sides because you never know what's going to happen in the future. So it's also best for countries to have different options, to keep the engagement open, because containment, confrontation are not going to make everybody, develop. Even if you're big and strong, and you still have to have maybe not alliance, but you need to have favorable positions and conditions around the globe. So I think being able to work with everybody is the key interest of everybody in the region. So I think choosing is not an option. I don't think we should choose. It's not wise to choose. We must be able to show the ability to work with everybody. And I think something that the two rivals should also understand, that we in the region, we don't want to choose. We want to work with everybody. And this is also something that I discussed with my colleague here in Berlin. And, German policy is also very clear with the Indo-Pacific guideline. German policy is that Germany has, of course, part of the NATO with the US, but German economy is very much tied to China. But Germany doesn't want to choose between the US and China. They want to work together on both sides. So I think it's important because this will create the peace in the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. So we have 8 minutes left, and I see 2 hands raised nicely for 8 minutes. So let me ask Yohei Taki and Gong to ask your questions. Please be brief.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Taki Yohei. I'm a student of Maritime Policy, Safety and Security Policy Program. I have a question to Professor Kanehara. So you mentioned the HOIP is an important framework. I recognize that the Japanese government puts emphasis on 3 principles of the rule of law, making claims based on international law, not using force in trying to drive their claims, and seeking to settle a dispute by peaceful means. I think when we resolve disputes, we should follow these principles. So this is a fundamental process. So this is a question. In order to spread these principles for creating peaceful seas, what action is the most effective and important? Thank you.
For me, I'm Warwit Punperm from Thailand, same class with Taki. I've asked a question about, we're talking about 3 levels. I'm from the Navy. Since I think maybe we didn't pull China to involve in our at the low level activity, like they joined the National Fleet Review. They trained with Thailand, Bruce Dyke, but I haven't seen a lot of bilateral training between in the East Asia and Asia. What if we bring them more to train more with us? Would it be possible? Thank you.
Ambassador Oegroseno.
Thank you. Yeah, why not?
Oh.
You know, joint exercises is something that we should do. Actually, disaster relief, as I mentioned a couple of times before, is a very important aspect in our part of the world. Japan, you live with tsunami. Indonesia live with tsunami, plus with different type of disasters. The Philippines live with a hurricane, for instance, and so we are in the regions where nature are not always nice to us. So unfortunately, but that's a fact of life. And this should become a factor where we look at the possibility to work together in our parts of the world with the role of the military, that is both military and also the non-military. So this is something that we can work together, And then of course, there is also one other aspect that is interesting to see, the peacekeeping forces. I mean, all these countries, we have sent individual peacekeeping forces, but I have yet to see an exercise of peacekeeping forces from our parts of the world together as one group, for instance. So it's not one flag, but I mean, maybe military from different parts of the world in East Asia and Southeast Asia. We could one day look at this type of exercise in the future. So as you are a naval officer, I know the importance of going out and meet your naval colleague to establish links, establish rapport. I think that kind of exercise, needs to be expanded further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanehara.
Thank you, Tax, for your contribution. Rule of law and no use of force and peaceful settlement of disputes are all stipulated in the United Nations Charter. We share that. and we are living with that for almost a century. But the P5 nations are not cooperating, and somebody should guarantee this order and these principles. And unfortunately, there's no one single world government. Then we have to realign to keep stability in the region and on a global scale. So strategic stability is the first thing that we have to realize. And in Asia, Japan is in that place because there are 5 allies of the United States in Asia, and the most trustworthy and most strong and the biggest is Japan. And if we fail to commit Americans in the region, we can be nowhere, and we can no longer guarantee stability. Without stability, we cannot adjust interests, and we cannot build trust. And the bigger ones bully small ones. We are going back to jungle. So keeping stability and making the strategic framework to keep balance and stability in the region is the first thing to do. Second is we have to integrate our regional economy. There are some differences of the precursors on the maritime side. Of India is coming in the framework of Indo-Pacific. We have to push forward the economic integration, connectivity efforts, infrastructure efforts. We have to do that. And finally, vis-a-vis China, we have to show them that the liberal order, free nations are very strong. We can make our people happier than dictatorship. And this is the only way to persuade China. It takes time, but we have to continue to show the vibrant democracy as a model of human society. That's what we have to do. These 3 things are very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you everybody for the great discussions. I learned so much. And I think we have at least 3 wishes. One is that, we would like to, China is very important to all the nations in the Indo-Pacific region. And we wish China will become a responsible great power. And we wish China to walk on the more cooperative path going forward. 2, we would like, the United States is an important country to us. If you have watched the debate between the 2 presidential candidates today, surprise, surprise, it was very interesting. Mr. Biden was on the offensive and Mr. Trump was on the defensive. Very characteristics of them. Anyway, so we would like to see our wishes. We would like to see the United States, whoever the president of the country is, continue to contribute to peace and prosperity into this region. And finally, we would like to see the issues of the South China Sea will be resolved peacefully. Indonesia, Japan, and all the other countries in the Indo-Pacific region, certainly the United States and China. We wish to all work together to resolve all the different problems that face us today peacefully and together.